All right, so I did a video recently called Why Heavy Records Suck Today, where I kind of made my argument for why so many, rock, metalcore, kind of the mainstream heavy music today, that the mixes are just completely generic. The productions are totally overdone. Nothing sounds real. Nothing sounds really unique. Everyone's just using the same way overdone drum samples that sound like cannons and sledgehammers, even on, and there's been like pop punk records come out recently where it's the drums just sound like absolutely massive, and it's not even fun to listen to because after about 30 seconds it's no longer sounds cool. It's just like an assault on your ears, and you can't actually enjoy the song because the mixer was so afraid not to have an absolute devastating gunshot of a snare sound. But I thought maybe I should follow that up showing you some other examples, some examples of records that I actually think do sound unique, do sound cool, are worth listening to for inspiration, and to show you that you don't necessarily have to follow that trend and do what everyone else is doing and go way overdone just to compete. So I've chosen 5 different records. Some are recent, some are from a number of years ago, but they all compete today. They all stand up to the mainstream records being released today in the heavy genre. And what's more is they're all going to last. They're going to stand the test of time. They're going to be listenable 10, 15 years from now. And that really is the problem. If you follow the trend and go way overdone, trying to compete on who has the most insane sounding kick and snare drum, then you're dated right away. Your mix is dated right away. So that's the time when everyone was doing that. That is not a good recipe for building your career as a mixer. So let me show you some productions that I find inspiring here. So the first one is the band Pierce the Veil, the album Selfish Machines. And I'm talking about the original release, not the reissue, the remix that they put out. I'll talk about that in a second. But here is one of the songs off the original release. So when I got this album on iTunes, it came with a bonus video, kind of a studio diary, and they had producer, I think it was Mike Green, in there, and talking about how they wanted to have a natural vibe. They wanted to use minimal or no drum samples. I'm not sure what it actually is, but you can hear the snare hits are like different. Every snare hit sounds a bit different. It sounds like a real kit. There's other parts in the record where he's playing a tom fill, and you can hear the cymbal bleed from the gate opening up. So I think that this is such a cool record, songwriting wise, production wise. I think Mike Green did an amazing job. It was one of these records that for like a year after, or even maybe more than that, every time I listened to it, I would hear new things. Be like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's a really cool layer. There's just so many great, interesting layers. It's that perfect marriage of really accessible, kind of pop savvy, catchy vocals and hooks, great vocal performances, but also some really smart musicianship and smart production, which I love the intersection of that. So I love how that sounds. Here's another track. Listen to all the layers happening here. Love the production. Love how that sounds. Love how it's natural, but it's still competitive. It still has a lot of energy. Now, unfortunately, for some reason, the band decided to get this remixed and released again. And man, listen to the difference here. Oh man, it's so much worse. I don't understand why they would do that. That's basically what I'm talking about when you just take all the drums and you just slam it with stuff that's like clearly has nothing to do with the real drum kit that was recorded. Again, listen to the old example of that same song. I don't know, you can comment below if you disagree with me, but this is so much more listenable and enjoyable and fun to listen to. So anyways, that's the first one on my list. I love this album, Selfish Machines from Pierce the Veil. Okay, Next one is a band called Spitfire, a little bit obscure, never were really much of a mainstream band, but this album called Cult Fiction, it came out, I don't know, it's fairly old now, but when it came out, it really caught my ear. And because it sounds so raw and so opposite of where everything was going, I think, again, this was maybe 10 years ago that it came out, something like that. And that was really the time where everything was like super processed, Steven Slate drums, everything was like just like really in your face, drum wise and drum sample wise. And everyone was going that way. But then this comes out. Check this out. This record is like probably one of the heaviest records in the fullest sense that I've ever listened to. And it's not because the drums are so slamming or anything like that. They're actually not. They're like fairly roomy, very natural sounding. Maybe there's samples on it, but they're very natural sounding samples. I don't know. This just sounds like a legit drum recording, and guitarist in front of his amp, like cranked up. It's just vocally, lyrically, it's just dark. The vibe is just very heavy, but not in the sense of like just using big drum sounds. It just has a heavy feeling when you listen to it. Let me skip to an end section here. I love how this is just, it sounds nothing like any other heavy record in the genre out there. They really were original, completely just got the sound that they were going for, and they clearly just did not care what the rest of the industry was doing. And I think it sounds awesome, very unique. It really stands out because of how it sounds. Next one, the opposite kind of end of the spectrum, commercially at least, Under Oath, obviously a huge band. I've liked a number of their records production-wise. The one that CLA mixed, Define the Great Line. Didn't love the Bendeth mixed one, but I think this came after that. It's called Disambiguation, and I really love the mix on this. This is a Ben Gross mix. I don't know a ton of records that he mixed, but I know he did some stuff for Cartel, and he did this one, and I love his drums. I love his overall mix, but again, this is a little bit outside of the genre norm in terms of having the drums super sample replace and everything like that. This sounds like a real drum mix. And I love Ben Gross's drum mix. And I think this whole record too, it's got a lot of bottom end. It's maybe actually what I would say if I was mixing, like maybe a little bit too much bottom end. But again, I love records that kind of buck the trend, and they just like, man, this feels big, heavy, sounds great. They're using the real drum sounds in here. And I love his snare sound. If you listen to some of Ben's other work, you hear his snare sounds. You could probably then listen to some of my work and see how that's kind of the snare sound I'm always trying to go for. Definitely been inspired by his work. So super competitive, but still very much sounding like a real band. All right, next up, the newest Architects album called Holy Hell, mixed by Adam Nolly Get Good, who I've recently, at least over the internet, become friends with a little bit. It's been great talking to him, really nice guy. Also discovered the amp sim plugins he did with Neural DSP, which I really like. I just line up with so much of how he thinks about making records, which is awesome. But this one's maybe the furthest on the kind of, it sounds more within the norms for the genre. However, I think this is a good example of a heavy, modern, competitive record where clearly, they're enhancing and using drum samples and stuff like that. And it's not necessarily trying to make a statement by sounding like a real raw kit or anything like that. But I think it still sounds like a real drum set. It still sounds like a real snare and everything like that. And I just think it's a really, really good mix. Oh, no,
that death is not defeat.
I just think it's a great balance, and I really like the drum sound and the snare sound.
If it's time on this day, I will see you where oceans meet. Past the present meet.
I want to point out, like, I'm not a guy who is anti-drum samples and is anti-making things sound bigger and cooler and more exciting than they would if you were just in a practice space with the band. Like, go and listen to my work. You can hear that I use all that stuff, but I still want it to sound like a real drummer. I still want it to sound like a real band. Even if I'm completely replacing the kick and snare, I still want it to sound like a normal kick and snare that, you know, at least had its origins in a real drum set, right? And I think, I really line up with Nolly's approach here. I think I would have mixed this similarly. It's a more modern processed sound, but it's still great to listen to. It doesn't distract from being able to enjoy the songs on the album. So love that one. And the last one on the list here, the newest Silverstein release. Now, as you might know, if you followed me for a bit, I've produced and mixed a number of Silverstein's records. This one I did not do. This is their most recent release, but I love the sound of this record as well.
I keep chasing bad feeling with bad habits. Good, but I need to calm down. But I'm back on my bullshit now. I'm chasing bad feelings. I keep breaking down and never deal with it.
I think this record really just nails the sweet spot between being competitive and polished. It's got a very polished sound. It also still sounds like a real rock band, which I love. Great drum sounds, nice room tone in there with the drums, great tones all around. And fun fact, really cool fact, is the guy who produced and mixed this Silverstein album, his name's Sam Guayana. He's actually a hardcore mixing student. He bought my hardcore mixing course way back in 2015. He's one of my first customers. And fast forward 4 years later, he's mixing Silverstein's album. So really cool stuff. I actually did a full live stream interview, and he actually went into his mix for this song, Bad Habits. So if you want to go behind the scenes of that mix and see how he mixed those drums and guitars and vocals, there's some really cool tips there. You can check that video out now. I hope this inspired you, gave you some hope, and kind of proved to you that you don't necessarily have to follow what everyone else is doing and try to match your mix to the newest crazy sounding thing that came out there. You can still have things sound like real drums and like a real band and still hit that competitive, polished, label-ready bar. All right, talk to you guys later.